Okay, let's get started. My first question to you is, how did you become a writer? How did all that begin? I know you told me that it's just a hobby, but how did that all begin?
Well, that's a good question. I can't really answer it. I was thinking about it earlier, and years ago I started writing in college, and I did some. Me and my grandpa were published in True West magazines, and we had, between the two of us, we had 5 stories, but it kind of took everything out of me to write, if you understand that. It was very hard. And then after I got married and I got more settled down and happy with my life, it came easy. So I just, get yourself in a good place, and it gets easier to write. And so I've been writing a few years now, and so I'm still working at it. I tell people I'm not a writer because they're always wanting me to write stories or asking me, when's the book coming out? And I tell people I'm not a cowboy, and they're always wanting me to do cow work or asking me questions about horses or something like that. And I tell people I'm not a public speaker, and they're wanting me to say, well, come speak at my club or my DRT meeting or something like that. So I started telling people I'm not the world's greatest lover. And they believed me when I told them that. So can I read? You want to ask questions, or do you want me to read you something I've written?
Yeah, you can go ahead and read something you've wrote.
Okay, I've got kind of a stack of them here. Now, this one's called Stonehenge. And these archaeologist fellers have been pondering for years over the mystery of Stonehenge. Well, sir, all they had to do was ask yours truly. It's all written down in the big book of coal. It ain't no mystery at all. You see, it all started in the reign of old King Cole. He wasn't just a nursery rhyme like y'all thought. A bunch of his boys was out with their hounds on one of their famous horseback coon hunts. They come upon a good place to camp and stayed 2 or 3 days. When they got home, they told their pappy, the king, about the spot, and he said, it sounds just like what I've been looking for. It's time we had a family reunion. You boys are coming of age, and it's important y'all know your family, and y'all don't go off and marry one of your cousins. Now, all the Cole kin and dog kin come from all over England. It was a big celebration. Whole steers and hogs was roasted in fire pits, huge pots of pinto beans and potatoes, and real honest-to-goodness coleslaw. They had horse races and goat ropings and calf ropings and bull riding, and the Cole women were some real fine saddle bronc riders. They topped it off with a donkey baseball game, and at night they played fiddles and danced into the wee hours. Now, all this went on for the longest till it started to rain. The king's wife, Queen Bee, she said she wouldn't have no part of living without a roof over her head and went back to the castle. Old King studied on the situation for a while and come up with an idea about putting a roof over the place. He sent his boys off in all directions to the wild tribes of England and told them that the dragons had escaped. Well, now, there weren't no dragons. All it was 2 old mossy-backed gators that the king kept in his moat. He had picked them up in a horse trade with some Cajun fellers years back and fed them scraps and occasional sheep that wandered too close. Now, there was only 2 of them, in England at the time, and the folks was deathly afraid of them. By the time word got around, they was 40 foot tall and flying and shooting fire out their nose. The king told these wild tribes that they needed help building a dragon trap and even offered a reward, 200 guineas to the tribe that did the most work. Back in jolly old England, they actually used birds as money, and that's how they got started calling them guineas. Now, there were Scotsmen and Irishers and Welts and Celts and Druids and a whole bunch of tribes that ain't even around anymore. They went to Dragon Rock and cutting timber. And the Irishmen had a leg up on the rock work ever since the famous Irishman Kilroy had built the pyramids in Egypt. So the great trap was finally finished, and the Irishers won the 200 guineas, which they traded to the Scotsmen for Scotch whiskey, and after drinking it for 2 days, proclaimed it vile stuff and swore their own. The Scotsmen hoarded the guineas, and that's why you'll never see any of them in England anymore, and the rest of the people had to switch to coinage. Now, things was going as planned. King Cole told the wild tribes to watch from some far-off hills to be out of danger. The Cole brothers had skinned one of the gators and put it on top of a Mexican fighting bull they'd planned to eat for supper. Right before dark, they tied torches to his horns and sicked the hounds on him. There was a whole lot of bellowing and dogs barking, and torch flames was going all over the bull hooking at the dogs. The king's brother, Santiago G. Cole, had been given the honor. He rode out in his shining armor and sashayed around some. He harpooned that bull right through the gizzard Comanche style. And the Cole brothers drug him inside and put him on the fire. From then on, the Cole clan used the place for family reunions and weddings and goat roping and such, and just called it the Big House. The other tribes stayed away for fear of dragons. This went on for hundreds of years till about 1600. Some surly fellers had become king by then, and he accused the Coles of poaching deer. Now, no Cole had ever been caught, but it didn't help matters that all the Cole pickaninnies was dressed in buckskin breeches and antlers was tacked to the barn wall. The head feller was William Cole, and the only thing he could do was skedaddle out of there. He stowed away on the first boat leaving port and ended up in a place called Virginia. And after a few generations, the Coles ended up in Texas and had brought the old ways of jolly old England with them. So now you know, the Coles got run out of England for poaching the king's deer. Old King Cole's brother's middle name was George, and the Santiago got shortened to Saint, and that's how St. George slayed the dragon. And if you eat barbecue or go to a rodeo or baseball game, a horse race, or a dance with fiddle playing, you can think of Cole brother. And you hardly ever hear of a Cole going to the Big House anymore. That's one of my longer stories. I'm glad I got a laugh out of it.
Before you read another story, I'll ask a question.
Sure.
What is the most difficult part of writing? What do you find is the most challenging part writing?
Well, I tell you, after I lost my wife, I've had a hard time.
I'm
but
sorry to hear
ideas,
that.
well, thank you. But the thoughts can come from anywhere. I've even dreamed of some stories. Mm-hmm. You know, they just kind of click in your head for whatever reason, and you know, but then getting them down on paper, and back when I was working, I had a lot of time to think, and I could write a story in my head and get it going to where I liked it before I ever put it on paper. Mm-hmm. But then when I started putting it on paper, I might change it completely. So, but just sitting down and doing it is one thing. That's probably the hardest part, is just sitting down and doing it. And now the ideas are starting to come back to me. And I'm glad of that. I got a new girlfriend, and she's helping me out a lot.
Well, that's good. Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Life goes on. It must go on,
It does. And you got to just keep on going. Sometimes it's one foot in front of the other, but you got to keep on.
Yeah. What is your advice to people who want to write? If not necessarily be a writer, but who just has the hobby like you have a hobby of writing? What are your words of wisdom and advice for that?
Get yourself in a good place. And a lot of people say, well, take writing lessons, take journalism courses. That can also put you into a format that, maybe format's the wrong word, but it can put you in a spot where your writing sounds like it's everybody else's.
Mm-hmm.
Do you understand that? I mean, it's like...
have your own style. Be yourself,
Be yourself, absolutely. Read a lot. But when I was writing a lot, I wouldn't read anything for at least a week. I didn't want to be influenced by any other writer. But also get yourself in a happy spot and just sit down and do it. And also, don't make your stories too complicated. I mean, I've got a writer friend, she's published big time, and her stories get complicated. And she keeps bringing in more characters and more plots. And also another writer friend, and I'm sure he's self-published because I don't think anybody would pick it up, but uses too many adjectives. He'll put like 6 or 8 adjectives into one sentence. And don't go for cliches. And also, it's like, I was reading a book, and the writer used the phrase turquoise skies. I'm like, what is he talking about? Turquoise comes in green, all shades of blue. It's like, you read that somewhere and used it. It's like, when you're telling a story, make it like you're sitting across the table from somebody drinking a glass of tea. So that's my advice. Make yourself interesting. Be interested in the world. So.
Absolutely. You have to be interested in it, because if you're not interested and people read your stories, they can pick up on, you're not convincing or your own story,
Right. And also write about what you know about. I mean, I couldn't write a story about New York City. I hadn't been there. I would have a hard time writing a story about New York. Now, Texas, I can write you some humdingers about Texas. That's just another little thing going on.
Yeah. Because I'm a writer myself. I'm an actor, but I also write, screenplays and short stories. And, your advice sticks very true. Write to what you know. If I don't know say something, I can't write nothing about California because I've never been to Hollywood or California, don't really know none of that experience.
Right. But you've been to Louisiana, and where are you living now? Alabama?
Mississippi.
Mississippi. Well, I was only a state off or so. But yeah, you could write about Louisiana, Mississippi, because you know it.
Mm-hmm.
And that just makes sense.
Yeah. And when you're writing, it has to be convincing because, the readers will pick up on that,
Right. And I think I told you before, I picked up storytelling from my grandpa.
Mm-hmm.
And he had people just come to see him to sit on the porch of his cabin and listen to him tell stories. And I remember as a little kid at night, all the old men, well, of course, they probably weren't old at the time, they'd sit out in the yard in chairs in the dark and tell stories. And so I grew up with that. I mean, he didn't even have a TV.
Mm-hmm.
So it was their entertainment was stories.
Yeah, absolutely. The older generation, the grandparents' generation, was just stories, really, and it was stories of their life or friends or stories they were told from their parents or grandparents, from generation to generation.
Right, and my dad was a good storyteller. He didn't tell stories, as much as my grandpa did, but he was still a good storyteller. And so I kind of inherited that. I'm glad I did.
Yeah. Do you have children to pass on your stories to? Do you have a lot of family where you can pass your stories down to generation?
I've got a lot of family. I don't have kids. I've got a couple of ladies that I kind of adopted in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And but I've got nieces and nephews and great nieces and great nephews, and won't be long before there's probably some great greats coming around. So yeah, I've got a good family and a lot of cousins, and
Mm-hmm.
And I think family is a great thing for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm close to even some of my fourth cousins.
Mm-hmm.
So, we've been in Texas a long time.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, I'm from the South as well, and it's family roots are deep in the South, it's the South is an interesting culture.
Oh, it sure is. And Texas is a little different culture than the South. But Texas is Texas. That's all you can say about it. We've got our own culture, and we picked up from the South, and part of it from the West, and part of it from the Mexico, and so it's very interesting. And then the European cultures, the Czech and the Germans and Swedes and all that have come to Texas and settled.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there was one time, and I've quit drinking about 30 years ago or more. I lost track. But I walked in a beer joint one day, and it was owned by Hispanics, but run by black folks. And I sit there and order me a beer, and on one side of me is two Hispanic guys, and the other side of me is two old Swedish farmers. Now, the farmers are speaking Swedish, and the Mexican guys are speaking Spanish. And as I'm drinking my beer, they started talking to each other. And I think they were understanding each other. And I said, it's time for me to get out of here. Yeah, it's a good life.
Yeah. Do you want to tell one more story before the interview's over?
I'll tell you as many as you want to listen to.
Okay.
Now, this is one of my favorites.
Okay.
And it actually happened. I mean, Stonehenge ought to be in the history books, but it may be a little far-fetched for most historians. But this one actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
I never call myself a cowboy. I'm only bow-legged from the knees down. But I done some things that would make most cowboys walk off and shake their heads. Now, Papa was born and raised south of Smithfield during the Depression on a place they called Ignorant Knob Hill. It was 50 acres of rock and gravel, 2 acres wide and 25 long. The Depression didn't change things. They was poor before and poor after. So when a neighbor lady had emus she was tired of feeding, Papa was thinking fresh meat, big turkey or chicken. It was all hands on deck to go get these birds. All hands was me and Myrna. Now, Myrna was red-headed, short, sweet, and petite. But she had more stick-to-itness than a bulldog chewing on a cow bone. So here I was with two people with, to quote an East Texas colored preacher, no quitting sense. So here we go, couldn't back a trailer up to the gate, too many trees. The emu lady tries to feed them. They ain't having none of that. We tried driving them. They'd rather run over you than get out of the way. They like to run over people or walk up them with feet like giant game roosters. Emu lady says, wish my son-in-law was here. He tackles them like playing football. I'm like, I wish I was here too. I mean, he was here too. I'd like to see that stuff myself. Finally, Papa says, can we do it my way? Emu lady says, you can do it any damn way you want. We break out the lariat ropes and start heading and heeling emus, tying their feet and dragging them in a trailer. I get spurred, Papa gets spurred, Myrna gets knocked silly into a post oak tree, a cow trailer load of emus. Now, as far as the meat goes, a longhorn bull yearling don't have nothing on toughness with an emu. You can boil it for 3 days and still tough as boot leather. If you want to round up some emus, don't call me. Oh, what the hell? Get me a couple of folks with no quitting sense, and I'll be right in the big middle of it. You want to do one more?
Yeah, one more's fine, yeah.
All right. Let me just, well, sir, I was listening to a gentleman named Baxter Black. He's a right fine writer and speechifier. You can tell by the way he throws $6 words around that he's well educated and a veterinarian. But he found his calling in telling stories. He's from New Mexico, but he reminds me of some fine folks I've met in West Texas. Now, most of these fellers are what you might call way above call. That I figured was due to cowboy evolution. You see, real tall cowboys in the post oak and cedar break parts of Texas are at a pure disadvantage when it comes to busting brush and was liable to get killed by limbs and grapevines. So it was simple, natural to migrate where there weren't nothing to keep them from growing except blue sky. Now, another West Texas evolution is their big old bushy mustaches. A right fine thing when you're drinking muddy water out of cow tracks or a mossy stock tank. Filters out sand and wiggle tails and such. Another thing is their cowboy hats that grow on them as soon as they can walk. Way back in the horse days, the hats was tall crowned and wide brimmed. Then the crowns got shorter and the brims went straight up the sides. This was so them fellers could ride three in a pickup. Now the brims come out flat for a ways and then straight up. And that's because over the years, truck cabs got bigger. Evolution can be right interesting. There's that one. And like I said, I've got a slew of them. So just write what you know about and have fun with it. Have fun in life.
Absolutely. Life is a challenge, but I'm always up for a challenge, you know.
Yeah, we've all got challenges. Let's go with it.
Absolutely.
You know, everybody's in a hard spot every now and then.
Yep. Well, Terry, thank you very much for letting me talk to you. It's been a pleasure. I'm glad we were finally able to do this.
Well, the pleasure's all mine, and I can't wait for this to come out.
Absolutely. I'll send you a link to it when it's uploaded, and you can share it on Facebook to your friends and all that. So
that sounds great, Trey.
Okay.
You take care of yourself.
You too. You have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye. And that was writer and storyteller Mr. Terry Cole. Thank you very much for listening. As always, thank you. And as always, again, God bless.